I was 17, and my name was Claire Abernathy. But in my family's pristine Victorian home, I was just a function. My only job was to keep their golden world polished, from my brother's debate trophies to my father's perfect public image. They saw me as a shadow, a quiet servant who existed to make their lives easier. But they made one mistake. They forgot that shadows see everything, and the tarnished locket around my neck held a secret that was about to burn their perfect world to the core. Before I tell you how I brought it all crashing down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt underestimated by your family. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. I stood in the parlor of our Victorian house in Riverbend, Maine, my hands moving mechanically over the silver trophy Ethan had won at the state debate championship. The cloth in my hand was soft, worn from years of polishing things that belonged to everyone but me. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner, each second a reminder of the life slipping through my fingers. I was 17, but I felt older, like I'd been carrying the weight of this house forever. My name is Claire Abernathy, but in this family, I was less a person and more a shadow, existing to keep the Abernathy name gleaming. My father, Richard, was a town councilman, his smile as polished as the silver I held. He was the kind of man who could charm a room while cutting you down with a glance. My mother, Carol, ran the local charity league, her face on every flyer, her voice dripping with benevolence at every gala. And Ethan, my older brother, was their golden boy, the future of Riverbend, destined for greatness. Me? I was the one who made sure Ethan's shirts were pressed, his trophies shined, his world perfect. I was the function, not the future. The locket hung heavy against my chest, tucked beneath my sweater. It was the only thing I owned that felt like mine. My grandmother had given it to me years ago, her hands trembling as she pressed it into my palm. "This is for remembering who you are, not who they tell you to be," she'd whispered, her eyes sharp with a secret I didn't yet understand. The locket was tarnished, unremarkable to anyone else, but to me it was a lifeline, a quiet rebellion against the life they'd scripted for me. The door slammed open, shattering the silence. Ethan stormed in, his face twisted with rage. "Claire, where's my jacket?" he barked, not looking at me, as if I were part of the furniture. His leather jacket, the one he needed for some party tonight, hung in the hall closet. I'd cleaned it yesterday, but I hadn't conditioned it. I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off. "You had one job, Claire. One. You ruined it." Before I could respond, his arm swung out, knocking over the antique lamp on the side table. It crashed to the floor, glass splintering across the hardwood. My heart lurched, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned not to. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, and my mother appeared, her lips pressed into a thin line. She surveyed the wreckage, then turned her gaze on me, cold as the Maine winter. "You are a storm in this house, Claire," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Clean this up and fix your brother's jacket. Your carelessness is becoming a liability." Behind her, Ethan smirked, his eyes glinting with triumph. I wanted to scream, to tell her it wasn't me, that it was never me. But I didn't. I never did. I knelt, gathering the shards of glass, my fingers trembling. The locket pressed against my skin, cool and grounding, the only thing keeping me from breaking apart. I cleaned the mess, conditioned the jacket, and went to bed that night with the weight of their words pressing down on me. I was invisible, and they liked it that way. The next morning, I dragged myself downstairs, my body aching from scrubbing floors and mending Ethan's jacket until midnight. All I wanted was a glass of orange juice, the one small thing I allowed myself in this house. The pitcher sat on the kitchen counter, freshly squeezed, a rare treat. I reached for a glass, but Ethan was already there, sprawled at the table, drinking straight from the pitcher. He didn't look up as I stood there, my throat tight with disappointment. "Ethan," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be, "you didn't save any?" He laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Privileges are earned, Claire. You haven't earned any lately." He took another swig, his eyes daring me to argue. Something snapped inside me. The words came before I could stop them, raw and jagged. "I earn every meal in this house, Ethan, for you, for them." My voice shook, but it didn't break. The kitchen went silent, the air thick with the weight of my defiance. Ethan's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. For the first time he looked at me like I was real, and it scared him. Footsteps. My father appeared in the doorway, his public smile gone, replaced by a mask of cold control. He didn't ask what happened, he never did. "Apologize to your brother," he said, his voice like steel. "Now." I stared at him, my heart pounding. The locket burned against my chest, my grandmother's words echoing in my head. "Who you are, not who they tell you to be." "No," I said, the words small but heavy, like a stone dropped in still water. His eyes widened just for a moment before they hardened. He crossed the room to his desk, pulling open a drawer. The leather belt he took out was old, worn from use. "Obedience is the rent you pay for living under this roof," he said, advancing on me. I'd felt that belt before, its sting a reminder of my place. But this time something was different. I didn't cower, I didn't move. I looked him in the eye and said it again. "No." He froze, the belt raised, his face a mix of shock and rage. In that moment, I turned and walked away. My legs shook as I climbed the stairs, but I didn't stop. In my room, I grabbed a duffel bag, stuffing in a change of clothes, the $200 I'd saved from my secret library job, and the locket. I didn't look back as I slipped out the back door, the night swallowing me whole. I hitched a ride with a trucker heading to Portland, my heart racing with equal parts terror and freedom. The road stretched out, dark and endless, and as Riverbend faded behind me, I felt the weight of my loneliness settle in. I was free, but I was alone, with nothing but the locket and a flicker of hope that I could be something more than what they'd made me. Portland was nothing like Riverbend. The city was loud, gritty, alive in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. I bounced between a women's shelter and a cheap motel, the kind with stained carpets and flickering lights. I found work as a dishwasher, my hands raw from scalding water and grease. Freedom wasn't what I'd imagined. It was hunger, exhaustion, and the constant fear that I'd made a mistake. But every time I thought about going back, I touched the locket and remembered why I'd left. 3 weeks in, I was wiping down counters at the diner when a familiar voice stopped me cold. "Claire." Reverend Miller, the pastor from Riverbend's church, stood in the doorway, his smile too tight to be kind. "Your parents are worried sick," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Your family's suffering, their reputation. A girl like you, alone in a city like this, it's not proper." I gripped the rag in my hand, my pulse racing. He stepped closer, offering me an envelope of cash. "Come home, Claire, it's where you belong." But his eyes weren't kind. They were threatening, a warning wrapped in scripture. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going back." He left, but his words lingered, a poison that seeped into my bones. They weren't done with me. They'd never be done with me. That night I lay awake in the shelter, the locket clutched in my hand, paranoia gnawing at me. I couldn't just run. I had to become someone they couldn't touch. The next day, I made a choice. Instead of saving for an apartment, I enrolled in a paralegal program at a community college. It was a risk. Every penny I had went to tuition, but it was my way out. Knowledge was something they'd never valued in me, and now it would be my weapon. As I sat in my first class, surrounded by strangers who didn't know the Abernathys, I felt a spark of something new. Not freedom, not yet, but possibility. The fluorescent lights in the community college library buzzed faintly, a steady hum that kept me grounded as I pored over my paralegal textbooks. It was late, past midnight, and the campus was a ghost town. My fingers ached from taking notes, but I didn't care. This was my fight now, my way of clawing out of the hole my family had buried me. The locket hung around my neck, a constant weight, a reminder of my grandmother's words. I fidgeted with it absent-mindedly, twisting the tarnished clasp as I read about contract law. The clasp gave way with a soft click. I froze, my breath catching. I'd never gotten it open before. It was always stuck, stubborn as the secrets it held. Under the dim light, I pried at it, my nails digging into the metal. The back popped loose, revealing a tiny compartment, not for a photo but for something else. My hands shook as I teased out a folded scrap of paper, so small it could have been missed forever. I unfolded it carefully like it might crumble. Scrawled in my grandmother's spidery handwriting was a string of numbers and a phrase. Act 34B, First Heritage Bank. Your tuition. My heart thudded. This wasn't a keepsake, it was a key. My grandmother hadn't just given me a trinket, she'd given me a weapon. I didn't know what Act 34B meant, but the words "your tuition" burned in my mind. She'd known I'd need a way out, a way to become more than the Abernathy's shadow. I tucked the paper back into the locket and snapped it shut, my pulse racing. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about uncovering something bigger, something my family didn't want me to find. I barely slept that night, my mind spinning with questions. What was in that safe deposit box? Why had my grandmother hidden it? The next morning I skipped class and took a bus to the public library where I could use the computers without anyone looking over my shoulder. I started digging, searching for First Heritage Bank. It had been swallowed up by a bigger bank years ago, its records scattered. But I wasn't giving up. This was my lifeline, and I'd follow it to the end. Tracking down that safe deposit box was like chasing a ghost. First Heritage's records were a mess, buried in mergers and outdated systems. I spent weeks navigating automated phone menus and filling out forms, my paralegal training the only thing keeping me sane. I learned the box was in my grandmother's name, which meant I had to prove I was her heir. That was a problem. My father was the executor of her estate, and he'd never let me near it. I drafted an affidavit, pouring everything I'd learned into it, arguing my case as if my life depended on it. Because it did. The bank manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense voice, read my affidavit with a frown. "This is unusual," she said, tapping her pen. "But it's thorough. You've got grit, kid." She approved my access and I nearly cried right there in her office. When she led me to the vault and handed me the box, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Inside there was no money, no jewelry, just papers. 2 sets of ledgers for the Abernathy Family Charity Foundation, a stack of signed blank checks, and a deed to a property I'd never heard of. I spread them out on the vault's table, my breath shallow. The ledgers told a story my family had hidden for years. The charity, my mother's pride and joy, was a front. My father and Ethan had been siphoning off town restoration funds, laundering the money through fake donations, and stashing it in offshore accounts. The checks were signed by a man named Robert Callahan, who died 5 years ago in a suicide that never sat right with anyone. He'd been their partner, their scapegoat. I sat there, staring at the evidence, my stomach churning. This wasn't just about the way they'd treated me. It was bigger, uglier. They'd stolen from Riverbend, from the people who trusted them, who put their faith in the Abernathy name. My grandmother had known, and she'd died before she could do anything about it. But she'd left it to me. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was a threat. I left the bank with the documents hidden in my backpack, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and purpose. I had the truth, but it felt like a ticking bomb. My family wasn't just cruel, they were criminals, and I was the only one who could bring them down. I thought I'd been careful, but I'd underestimated them. My inquiries about the safe deposit box must have raised a flag, because a week later, Ethan showed up in Portland. Not at my job or my motel, but in the coffee shop where I studied, like he'd been watching me. He didn't approach me directly. Instead, he sent Tommy, a boy from Riverbend I'd once had a crush on. Tommy slid into the seat across from me, his smile too warm, too familiar. "Claire, you okay?" he asked, like we were still friends. "Your family's worried. They just want you home." I wanted to believe him, but I saw the way his eyes darted to my backpack where the documents were hidden. He wasn't here for me. He was here for them. My chest ached with betrayal, but I played along, mumbling something about needing time. When he left, I packed up and moved to a new motel that night, my paranoia spiking. They were closing in. Then my apartment was trashed. Not robbed, nothing was taken, but my legal textbooks were shredded, pages scattered like confetti. A warning. I knew the Riverbend police wouldn't help. My father had the chief on speed dial. I was alone, and the evidence in my backpack felt heavier every day. I couldn't go to the local cops, couldn't trust anyone from my past. So I worked in the shadows, photocopying the ledgers at a 24-hour print shop, encrypting digital scans on a library computer. Every creak in the motel made me jump. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. I was drowning, the weight of what I knew pulling me under. My family wasn't just powerful, they were untouchable, or so they thought. But I had something they didn't, the truth, and the stubbornness to use it. I just had to figure out how to stay alive long enough to do it. I sat in the dim glow of my motel room, the photocopied ledgers spread out on the bed, each page a piece of the truth that could destroy my family. My hands didn't shake anymore. Fear had burned itself out, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. I'd spent weeks compiling the evidence, every ledger, every check, every damning detail, into 3 airtight packages. One for the FBI's white-collar crime division in Boston, one for the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, one for Sarah Kaplan, an investigative journalist at the Boston Globe, whose articles I'd read obsessively. She had a reputation for taking down the untouchable. I sealed the envelopes, my handwriting precise, and drove to the post office at dawn. Registered mail, no return address. I dropped them in the slot and walked away, my heart pounding with the weight of what I'd just done. The next morning, I rented a car with the last of my savings and drove back to Riverbend. The road felt different now. The familiar pines and faded billboards, no longer a cage but a battlefield. I pulled up to the Victorian house at dusk, its pristine facade glowing under the porch light. It looked like a museum, untouched by the rot inside. I carried an old cardboard box, one I'd found in the motel's dumpster. Inside, I'd packed the relics of my servitude. A single polished silver spoon, a crumpled list of chores from when I was 12, a cheap bracelet my mother had re-gifted me one Christmas. On top, I placed the empty safe deposit box, its metal cold against my fingers. I wrote a note on a scrap of paper, my words simple but sharp. "You can have it all back." I taped it to the box and set it on the porch, right where they'd find it. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing through the house like a gunshot. Then I turned and walked back to the car, my steps steady, my breath even. I didn't look back. As I slid into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed. "Mom," I let it ring. It buzzed again. "Dad," I silenced it. A text from Ethan popped up. "Whatever you think you're doing, you'll regret this forever." I deleted it without reading the rest. The locket hung against my chest, a quiet anchor, reminding me who I was. Not their shadow, not their storm, just Claire. I drove toward the edge of town, the weight of 17 years lifting with every mile. As I passed the old mill, I saw them. State police cars, their lights flashing in the rearview mirror, speeding toward the house. Not Riverbend's cops, but state troopers, outsiders my father couldn't control. A small, hard-won smile tugged at my lips. The trap I'd set was springing shut, and for the first time I felt the power shift. They weren't untouchable anymore. I was. A year later, I sat in my tiny Boston apartment, sunlight streaming through the window, warming the leaves of a single potted plant on the sill. It was a cutting from my grandmother's garden, one she'd given me when I was a kid, whispering, "Keep it alive, Claire, it'll remind you to grow." I'd kept it alive through everything, and now it thrived, its green leaves a quiet victory. I was 20 now, working as a paralegal at a law firm in the city, saving every penny for law school. The work was grueling, but it was mine. For the first time my life felt like it belonged to me. My tablet lay on the table, open to a Boston Globe article. The headline was stark: "Riverbend's Fall, Abernathy family faces federal charges." My father and Ethan were on trial for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The article detailed the charity scam, the offshore accounts, the signed checks from a dead man. Riverbend was reeling, its pride shattered. My mother, it said, had become a recluse, her charity league dissolved, her name a whisper of shame. I didn't feel joy reading it, I didn't feel hate, I felt quiet, like justice had finally found its voice. My phone pinged, a message from Maya, a friend I'd made in my paralegal program. "Seen the news? You're officially a legend." I smiled, typing back, "I'm officially free." And I was, free from the house, the lies, the weight of their expectations, free to be Claire Abernathy, not the Abernathy's shadow. I stood and walked to the window, watering the plant with a small, chipped mug. My reflection caught in the glass, not the scared girl who'd fled Riverbend, but a woman who'd fought her way out. The locket still hung around my neck, its clasp now loose, its secret spent. I didn't need it to remind me who I was anymore. I knew. I thought of my grandmother, her trembling hands, her fierce eyes. She'd given me more than a locket or a safe deposit box. She'd given me a chance to rewrite my story. I wasn't defined by their cruelty or their crimes, I was defined by what I'd done with the truth. The city hummed outside, alive with possibility, and I felt it in my bones, a quiet, unshakable peace. I'd built something new, something real. And it was enough.